You raise your voice. Just once. Your child freezes, eyes wide, and for a second it actually works. They stop talking back. They stop the meltdown. Crisis over, or so it seems. But the real answer is far stranger. That moment of silence isn't obedience. It's a biological shutdown. And what happens inside your child's brain in the seconds after you yell is almost nothing like what you think is happening. Start with the sound itself. Not the words. The sound. Long before your child can understand language, their brain is already built to detect threat in a voice. A sharp, raised tone triggers something called the orienting reflex, a primitive alarm system shared by nearly every mammal on Earth. The body hears danger before the mind hears meaning. This is why a 6-month-old reacts to an angry tone in a language they don't even speak yet. The brain isn't translating your sentence. It's scanning your pitch, your volume, your speed, the tightness in your throat. So when you yell, even with good intentions, even out of love, even because you're exhausted and it slipped out before you could stop it, your child's brain doesn't register a lesson. It registers a threat. Here's where it gets interesting. The researcher Stephen Porges spent decades studying how the nervous system responds to vocal tone, a body of work he calls polyvagal theory. According to his research, a harsh or loud voice activates the same defensive circuitry the body uses for physical danger. Not metaphorically. Literally. The nervous system can't fully distinguish between an angry parent and an actual predator. Both trigger the same ancient alarm, wired in long before either parents or predators existed in the form we know them today. That alarm has a name. Researchers who study trauma and brain development, including the work of psychiatrist Bruce Perry, describe it as the brain shifting out of its thinking state and into a survival state. The part of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, and understanding consequences, known as the prefrontal cortex, effectively goes offline. A faster, more reactive, instinct-driven part of the brain takes over instead, one built for speed, not for reflection. Translate that into a sentence your child could actually use. While you are yelling, the part of their brain you are trying to reach has temporarily left the building. Which means the lecture you give in that exact moment, however clear, however justified, however true, is being delivered to a brain that is not currently capable of learning from it. You could be saying the wisest words a parent has ever spoken, and your child's system would still process it the same way it processes a fire alarm. Not as information. As noise to escape. This is the twist most parents never hear. You think you are teaching a lesson. Biologically, you are interrupting one. So why does yelling sometimes look like it works? Why does the child stop immediately, go quiet, even apologize? Because freezing is not agreement. It's a survival response. Psychologists describe 3 classic reactions to perceived threat: fight, flight, or freeze. A child can't fight back against a parent. A young child often can't flee the room either. So the body defaults to the third option. Stillness. Silence. Compliance that looks like understanding but is actually closer to shutdown. The same way a small animal goes still when a larger one approaches. It feels like a win in the moment. It rarely is in the long run. Think about what the child actually learns from that exchange. Not the lesson about chores, or homework, or hitting a sibling. The deeper lesson, the one that sinks in underneath the words, is about the relationship itself. Big feelings get met with bigger feelings. Loud voices win. Safety is conditional. None of that is intentional on a parent's part. It's simply what the nervous system absorbs while the thinking brain is offline and unable to catch the more accurate version of events. In 2013, a researcher named Ming-Te Wang led a study published in the journal Child Development that followed adolescents and their families over time, tracking what happened when parents relied on harsh verbal discipline, things like yelling, harsh criticism, or shouting in anger. The findings were uncomfortable for a lot of parents to read. Harsh verbal discipline was linked to increases in behavioral problems and depressive symptoms in teenagers, even in households that were otherwise warm and loving. Love didn't cancel out the impact. It just made the contradiction harder for kids to process. A parent who is kind most of the time but explosive sometimes creates a confusing, unpredictable emotional environment, and a child's nervous system never quite knows which version of the parent is about to show up next. Here's the part that surprises people most. Yelling doesn't just fail to teach the lesson you intended in that moment. It can actively interfere with your child's ability to regulate emotions for years afterward. Children build their emotional regulation skills the same way they build vocabulary, through repeated exposure and modeling, not through instruction alone. When a calm adult helps a child move through frustration, fear, or anger, the child's brain is slowly wiring a template for how to handle big feelings on their own one day. But when the adult's response to stress is to escalate, the child doesn't learn regulation. They learn escalation. The nervous system gets trained on the model it sees most often, not the one it's told to follow in a quiet, calm conversation later. This is sometimes described by child development researchers as co-regulation. Before children can self-regulate, they borrow regulation from a calm adult nervous system nearby, almost like plugging into an external battery. Your tone, your face, your breathing, the speed of your movements, these are quietly teaching your child what to do with overwhelming emotion long before any lecture, rule, or consequence ever does. Consider how this plays out in an ordinary household, not a dramatic one. A child spills a glass of milk for the third time that week. A parent, already running on too little sleep and too many deadlines, snaps. The child doesn't think, "I should be more careful with glasses." The child's body thinks, "danger," and scrambles to make the danger stop, usually through tears, silence, or a sudden apology that has nothing to do with actual remorse and everything to do with survival. Multiply that single moment by thousands of small interactions across childhood, and a pattern starts to form, not consciously chosen by anyone, simply built brick by brick out of repetition. So what does the brain actually need in a moment of misbehavior? Not a louder voice. A calmer one. This doesn't mean permissiveness. It doesn't mean no consequences, no boundaries, no firmness, no follow-through. It means the firmness has to arrive through a regulated nervous system, not a flooded one, because a dysregulated parent voice simply cannot produce a regulated child brain. You cannot borrow calm from chaos. You cannot hand someone a steady hand while your own is shaking. There's a strange mirror here, one that connects directly back to that first moment in the kitchen, or the car, or the grocery store aisle with everyone watching. Adults experience the exact same threat response children do. When your own voice starts to rise, that's often your own nervous system tipping into the same fight, flight, or free state you just read about. Which means the very moment you most want to teach your child to manage their emotions is often the moment your own emotional brain has also gone offline, racing ahead of your better judgment. This is why so many parents say the same exact thing after a yelling episode. "I knew it wasn't working, even as I was doing it. I could hear myself and I couldn't stop." That isn't weakness. That's neuroscience. You were both dysregulated at the same time, and two activated nervous systems can't co-regulate each other. They just amplify each other, like two alarms going off in the same room, each one making the other harder to ignore. The good news, if there is good news buried inside all of this, is that the same biology that makes yelling backfire also makes calm repair incredibly powerful. Children are remarkably responsive to repair, far more than most parents realize. A parent who returns after a hard moment, lowers their voice, and reconnects sends an enormously reassuring signal to a young nervous system. The threat has passed, the relationship is intact, safety has returned, the world is steady again. Researchers who study attachment, building on the foundational work of psychologist Mary Ainsworth, have long noted that it isn't the absence of conflict that predicts a secure parent-child bond. It's the presence of repair afterward, again and again, over years. That single idea quietly rewrites the whole problem. The goal was never get frustrated. No parent manages that, not even the calmest one you know. The goal is what happens in the 60 seconds after the storm. A short, calm sentence after a blow-up does more repair work than people expect. Something as simple as acknowledging that voices got loud, that everyone is okay now, that the rule still stands but the yelling wasn't the right way to say it. The child's nervous system isn't listening for a perfect apology. It's scanning for one thing: is it safe to come back online? And there's a longer-term pattern hiding underneath all of this too. Children who experience consistent repair after conflict tend to develop a more flexible, resilient stress response over time, partly because their nervous system learns that distress is temporary and survivable, not permanent and overwhelming. Children who experience conflict without consistent repair often develop the opposite expectation, that disconnection might be the new normal, which keeps their threat detection system running a little hotter than it needs to. None of this requires a perfect parent. It requires a parent willing to notice the pattern and interrupt it slightly more often than not. Repair doesn't need to be elaborate. It rarely involves a long speech. Most of the time it looks almost embarrassingly simple: a parent crouching down, lowering their voice, and saying that things got too loud, that the rule still matters, but the yelling wasn't fair. Children remember that moment far longer than they remember the yelling itself. Think back to that moment again. The raised voice. The sudden silence. The child who stopped. It looked, for a second, like discipline had worked. What had actually happened was simpler and stranger than that. A nervous system detected danger, shut down its thinking brain, and braced for safety to return. The lesson your child needed wasn't in the volume of your voice. It was never going to be in the volume of your voice. It was in what happened next, in the calm that followed, in the regulated adult who came back into the room and made it safe to think again. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to stay long enough, and calm enough, for your child's brain to come back online, and actually listen.